The receptionist wrinkled her nose. "Security will escort you out if you don't leave voluntarily," she said, eyeing his worn jacket and scuffed boots with disgust. "This is a respectable company, not a charity." But what she didn't know was that the homeless drifter she was rejecting had once commanded the respect of presidents and foreign ministers. His name was Thomas Mitchell, and in 30 minutes, her boss would be begging for his forgiveness. Thomas Mitchell stood outside Prestige Solutions Inc., adjusting his only clean shirt for the third time. At 68, he carried himself with the straight-backed posture that never quite leaves a military man, despite the frayed collar and shoes held together with electrical tape. The job posting had been simple: security consultant needed, military experience preferred. It seemed like a gift from heaven after 3 months of living in his car. He'd spent his last $5 at a laundromat that morning, washing and pressing his clothes until they looked almost respectable. His gray hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved using the restroom at a nearby McDonald's. But poverty has a way of clinging to a person, and Thomas knew he looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd lost everything. The glass doors of Prestige Solutions reflected his image back at him: tired eyes in a weathered face, clothes that had seen better years, hands that trembled slightly from medication he could barely afford. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked inside. The reception area was all marble and chrome, designed to intimidate. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. And the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails, looked up from her computer with barely concealed annoyance. "Excuse me," Thomas said politely, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to command. "I have an appointment at 2 o'clock with Mr. Harrison about the security position." The receptionist, whose nameplate read Ashley, looked him up and down with unconcealed disgust. Her eyes lingered on his patched jacket and scuffed boots. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. Mr. Harrison doesn't meet with people like you." "People like me?" Thomas asked quietly. Ashley's voice rose, drawing attention from other staff members. "Homeless people, drifters, whatever you are. This is a respectable company, not a soup kitchen." She reached for her phone. "Security will escort you out if you don't leave voluntarily." Thomas didn't move. "Ma'am, I have military experience relevant to the position. I served my country for—" "Sure you did," Ashley interrupted with a harsh laugh. "Let me guess, Navy SEAL? Special Forces? You people always claim to be heroes." She dialed security. "We have a situation in the lobby." Other employees had gathered to watch the spectacle. Some whispered behind their hands, others stared openly. Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks, not from anger, but from the familiar shame that had followed him since he'd lost his home, his pension, his dignity. But one person wasn't laughing. Janet Reeves, a middle-aged accountant, had been walking past when she heard Thomas speak. Something in his voice, his posture, the way he held himself despite the obvious poverty, reminded her of her late father, a Vietnam veteran who'd taught her to recognize the bearing of a true soldier. "Ashley," Janet said quietly, "maybe you should." "Mind your own business, Janet," Ashley snapped. "I know how to handle vagrants." Just then, security arrived, a burly man named Rick who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He took one look at Thomas and hesitated. Something about the older man's stance, the way he waited calmly for whatever would come, spoke to every instinct Rick had developed about reading people. "Sir," Rick said respectfully, "I'm going to have to ask you to." "It's all right, son," Thomas said, his voice carrying decades of authority despite his circumstances. "I understand." He turned to Ashley. "I apologize for any inconvenience, miss. I was simply trying to make an honest living." As Thomas headed for the door, Rick called out, "Sir, what branch did you serve in?" Thomas paused. "Army, 42 years. Rick's eyes widened. 42 years. What was your rank when you retired, sir?" A small smile crossed Thomas's weathered face. "Brigadier General." The lobby fell silent. Ashley's face went white. Janet stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "General Mitchell? Thomas Mitchell?" Thomas nodded slowly. "That's correct." Janet's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, you're the General Mitchell, the one who negotiated the Baltic Peace Accords. You were on the cover of Time magazine." "That was a long time ago," Thomas said quietly. Rick snapped to attention and saluted. "General, sir, I served under your command in the 82nd Airborne 3rd Brigade. You probably don't remember, but you personally commended my unit after the Kandahar operation. Sergeant Rick Mendoza, Thomas replied without hesitation. I remember every soldier who served with distinction. How are Maria and the kids? Rick's eyes filled with tears. You remember my family, sir. A commander who doesn't know his people isn't worth the uniform, Thomas said. I hope they're well. By now, word was spreading through the office like wildfire. The homeless man Ashley had been ready to throw out was not just a veteran, he was a legend. Someone had Googled his name, and photos began circulating on phones. General Thomas Mitchell shaking hands with presidents, receiving the Distinguished Service Medal, addressing the United Nations. The elevator dinged, and out stepped Robert Harrison, the company CEO. He was rushing toward a meeting when he noticed the unusual crowd in his lobby. What's going on here? He demanded. Ashley's voice cracked as she spoke. Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. This gentleman had an appointment with you, but I thought... You thought what? Harrison's eyes swept the scene, taking in the crowd, Rick's military salute, and Thomas's dignified bearing despite his shabby clothes. Janet stepped forward. Mr. Harrison, this is General Thomas Mitchell. He's here about the security consultant position. Harrison's face went pale. General Mitchell? The General Mitchell? He looked at Thomas with a mixture of awe and horror. Sir, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea. How could you? Thomas replied with grace. I don't exactly look the part anymore. Harrison turned to Ashley, his voice ice cold. My office, now. Then to Thomas. General, would you please join me as well? I believe we have much to discuss. As they waited for the elevator, Harrison noticed Thomas's hands shaking slightly. Sir, are you all right? Parkinson's, Thomas said simply. Among other things. The VA does what it can, but... He didn't finish the sentence. How are you? Harrison struggled with the question. Homeless, Thomas completed. It's not uncommon for veterans, even senior officers. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer treatments ate through our savings. I had some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. Pride kept me from asking for help until it was too late. He paused. I've been living in my car for 3 months. The elevator ride was silent, except for Ashley's quiet sobbing. In Harrison's office, Thomas sat straight-backed in a leather chair that probably cost more than he'd spent on food in the past month. Harrison poured coffee from an expensive machine, his hands shaking as he handed the cup to Thomas. General, Harrison began, I don't even know where to start apologizing. No apology necessary, Thomas interrupted. Your receptionist was protecting your company as she saw fit, though perhaps a lesson in basic human dignity wouldn't go amiss. Ashley, who had been crying silently in the corner, finally spoke. General Mitchell, I am so sorry. I was horrible to you. I have no excuse. Thomas looked at her with eyes that had seen combat, loss, and now the cruelest enemy of all, being forgotten. Ashley, we all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in the mistake, but in how they learn from it. Harrison leaned forward. General, about the position, honestly, we were looking for someone to advise us on basic security protocols. But having someone of your caliber, it would be an honor. The salary we discussed on the phone seems insulting now. The salary was fair then, and it's fair now, Thomas said. I'm not the same man who wore stars on his shoulders. I'm just someone who needs work and has experience to offer. With respect, sir, you're exactly the same man, Rick said from the doorway, where he'd been quietly standing guard. Rank is temporary, character is permanent. Harrison stood and extended his hand. General Mitchell, Prestige Solutions would be honored to have you join our team. Full salary, full benefits, and... He paused, looking embarrassed. Sir, about your current living situation. I can handle my own affairs, Thomas said firmly, then softened. But I appreciate the concern. We have corporate housing, part of the benefits package for senior consultants, Harrison said quickly. It's just sitting empty anyway. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I've been proud my whole life. Maybe too proud, but pride doesn't keep you warm at night. He looked up. I accept. All of it. The news of General Mitchell's hiring spread through the company within hours. By the end of the day, Thomas had been approached by dozens of employees, many of them veterans who shared their own stories of struggle and triumph. He listened to each one with the patience of a man who understood that everyone fights battles others can't see. Ashley was not fired. At Thomas's request, she was enrolled in sensitivity training and assigned to work directly with him on veteran outreach programs. She has potential, he told Harrison. She just needs to learn that honor doesn't wear expensive clothes. 6 months later, Thomas Mitchell stood before a room full of corporate executives, delivering a presentation on security protocols that would be implemented across 3 states. His hands still shook from Parkinson's, but his voice carried the same authority that had once commanded armies. After the meeting, he walked to the parking garage where his car, his former home, sat in the space marked reserved for T. Mitchell, senior security consultant. He kept the car as a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to treat everyone with dignity. Rick Mendoza had been promoted to head of security and often worked closely with Thomas. Their friendship had deepened beyond their military connection. They were 2 men who understood that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Ashley had become one of the company's most compassionate employees. She volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends and had developed a program to help veterans transition back into civilian careers. She never forgot the lesson Thomas taught her that day, that a person's worth cannot be measured by their circumstances. Harrison often told the story to other business leaders, though he never mentioned names without permission. I almost lost the best employee I ever hired because I let someone judge him by his appearance instead of his character, he would say. It taught me that dignity should be given freely, not earned through status. Thomas established a foundation to help homeless veterans, funded partially by his salary and partially by donations from other employees who had been touched by his story. The foundation's motto, displayed in the company lobby, read, "Honor has no expiration date." A year after that humiliating day in the lobby, Thomas was invited to speak at the company's annual meeting. He stood before hundreds of employees, board members, and guests, wearing a crisp new suit but carrying himself with the same quiet dignity he'd shown even in his darkest hour. "A year ago, I walked into this building as a broken man," he began. "I was homeless, forgotten, reduced to statistics about veteran homelessness that most people prefer to ignore. I was treated exactly as my appearance suggested I deserved to be treated." He paused, looking out at faces that were now familiar, respectful, attentive. But one person saw past the surface, then another, and another. They didn't see a general or a hero. They saw a human being who deserved basic respect. That simple act of recognition saved my life. His voice grew stronger. We all have the power to be that person for someone else, to look beyond appearances and see worth, to offer dignity freely, not as something that must be earned. Because today's homeless veteran might be tomorrow's valued colleague. Today's struggling single mother might be next year's innovative leader. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the speech, Thomas returned to his office, a real office with his name on the door and a view of the city where he'd once slept in his car. On his desk sat a framed photo of his late wife and a small American flag. Next to them was a letter from a young veteran the foundation had helped find housing and employment. As the sun set over the city, Thomas Mitchell reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd lost everything, rank, home, dignity, only to discover that what truly mattered couldn't be taken away. His character, his ability to serve others, his capacity for grace under pressure, these had survived even his darkest days. He thought about Ashley, who had grown from a judgmental young woman into a compassionate advocate. About Rick, whose respect had helped restore Thomas's faith in the bonds that connect all who serve. About Harrison, who had turned a moment of corporate embarrassment into an opportunity for growth. But mostly, he thought about the thousands of veterans still sleeping in cars, still facing rejection, still fighting battles that the rest of the world couldn't see. Tomorrow, he would continue fighting for them, using his restored platform to ensure that no veteran would be dismissed as easily as he had been. The homeless veteran who had been thrown out of the building was gone. In his place stood Thomas Mitchell, not a general anymore, but something more important. A man who had learned that true honor comes not from the respect you're given, but from the respect you give others. As he prepared to leave for his apartment, his home, Thomas picked up the phone to call another veteran the foundation was helping, because the best way to honor his second chance was to make sure others got theirs too. The receptionist's desk in the lobby now bore a small plaque. Dignity begins here. It was a reminder to every visitor and employee that first impressions might be inevitable, but first judgments are always a choice. And every morning, when Thomas Mitchell walked through those glass doors, he remembered that the most important battles aren't always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in office lobbies, in job interviews, in the countless moments when we choose between judgment and grace. He had chosen grace, even when it wasn't given to him. And in doing so, he had not only saved himself, he had shown an entire company what it really means to serve.